John Deere's move to Mexico has shocked Wall Street and the White House. But is it treason or smart survival in a tough global economy? At Eagle Discovery, we dive into what Made in the USA really means today and why this shift could redefine America's industrial future. In today's video, we'll explore a topic that has sparked much debate. But first, a quick disclaimer. This content is for analytical and educational purposes only and does not represent any political position or organization. We will approach everything with an open mind and objective thinking. John Deere's Mexico pivot, strategy over sentiment in an era of economic realignment. John Deere, a storied emblem of American agriculture, has ignited political uproar and economic debate by moving part of its manufacturing operations to Mexico. While critics paint the decision as a cost-cutting betrayal of American labor, a closer look reveals a strategic recalibration driven by the unforgiving mechanics of global competition. The shift is not an act of disloyalty, it's a business necessity. As production costs climb at home and international rivals scale up with leaner operations, even the most iconic American brands must rethink their survival strategies. In today's interconnected economy, nostalgia alone doesn't pay the bills. Adaptation does. Former President Donald Trump's swift and incendiary response, threatening a 200% tariff on John Deere equipment made in Mexico, reflects a larger battle between protectionist populism and corporate realism. His remarks, rooted in his America First doctrine, channel public anger over industrial decline, yet overlook the deeper forces reshaping modern manufacturing. Political rhetoric often demands loyalty to national soil. Business logic demands loyalty to global viability. But this is more than a clash between boardrooms and ballot boxes. It's a collision between short-term political timelines and the long-term imperatives of competitiveness. Elected officials operate within 4-year cycles. Multinational corporations must think in terms of decades, technological transitions, and transcontinental supply chains. John Deere's move raises a timely, complex question. What does it truly mean to be an American company today? Is it about where factories are located or where innovation happens, where jobs are created and where value is added in the broader economic ecosystem? For many 21st century firms, national identity is no longer defined by geography but by leadership. If John Deere continues to invest in U.S. research, employ American engineers, and drive agricultural innovation worldwide, does relocating some assembly lines to Mexico diminish its American character or reinforce its resilience? Moreover, the decision casts a harsh light on America's industrial policy gap. If the nation wants to retain manufacturing at home, it must compete not through penalties, but through preparation, investing in automation, infrastructure, workforce retraining, and a regulatory framework that encourages innovation rather than punishes migration. Tariffs may win headlines, but they won't build the factories of the future. This moment is not about betrayal, it's about evolution. John Deere is adapting to a world where success demands flexibility and foresight. Its move to Mexico is not an abandonment of American ideals, but a reflection of the uncomfortable truth that competing globally sometimes requires expanding beyond borders. In the end, this story is not about a company turning its back on the United States. It's about a nation being challenged to rethink what it takes to lead in a new industrial age. Trump's tariff gambit, when economic nationalism clashes with global reality. Former President Donald Trump's sweeping tariff campaign, most notably aimed at China, signaled a radical shift in American trade strategy. Framed as a patriotic effort to shrink the trade deficit and restore American manufacturing might, the imposition of tariffs up to 125% on Chinese goods was designed to assert U.S. dominance in global commerce. But instead of a clear-cut victory, the policy ignited a retaliatory spiral that exposed the risks of waging economic war in an interdependent world. China responded swiftly and strategically, retaliating with tariffs as high as 84% on American exports. This move targeted core sectors of the U.S. economy, from agriculture to automotive manufacturing. Overnight, everyday American products, from soybeans to smartphones, pickup trucks to washing machines, became battlegrounds in a geopolitical tug-of-war. What began as a campaign promise to punish China quickly turned into a catalyst for consumer inflation and market volatility at home. Beyond tariffs, a quieter but far more potent threat lurked in the background: China's grip on over $1 trillion in U.S. Treasury bonds, often described as Beijing's economic nuclear option. The mere suggestion of offloading a significant portion of these holdings has the power to rattle global financial markets. While such a move would hurt both economies, the very possibility serves as a sobering reminder of how deeply entangled the U.S. and Chinese financial systems remain. Trump's trade doctrine assumed that economic coercion would compel Beijing to concede, but the reality proved more complex. Instead of submission, China doubled down on self-reliance, accelerated investment in domestic technology, and sought alternative markets. Meanwhile, U.S. consumers absorbed higher prices, American farmers lost critical export pathways, and businesses scrambled to navigate disrupted supply chains. This episode underscores a painful paradox. The harder nations push for economic independence through isolationist tools, the more they expose their vulnerability in a globalized economy. Supply chains are no longer confined by borders, and capital knows no nationalism. In this context, unilateral protectionism may deliver short-term political wins but often results in long-term strategic losses. The fallout of Trump's tariffs forces a reassessment of what economic power means in the 21st century. It's no longer defined by how many factories one can bring home, but by how effectively a country can innovate, form alliances, and adapt to shifting global dynamics. Economic influence today is built not on tariffs and threats, but on resilience, flexibility, and cooperative strength. What the tariff war revealed is more important than what it achieved. It exposed the illusion of decoupling in an age where economies are profoundly interconnected. In weaponizing trade, the U.S. opened a front it could not unilaterally control, and in doing so, demonstrated that in global economics, blunt instruments often come with unintended consequences. Ultimately, the legacy of Trump's trade policy may lie not in reshoring jobs or rewriting trade balances, but in teaching a critical lesson: economic nationalism, when wielded without foresight, risks turning every nation involved into collateral damage. Trade war without borders: how tariff tensions bled into North American alliances. When the Trump administration launched its aggressive trade war against China, most expected the front lines to remain in the Pacific. Yet, as the dust settled, it became clear that the fallout extended far beyond the intended adversary. Among the most surprising victims was not a distant rival, but a long-standing friend: Canada. The imposition of a 25% tariff on Canadian steel and aluminum, materials long integrated into the arteries of North American manufacturing, sent a shockwave through one of the world's most stable trade relationships. This wasn't just a policy decision. It was a rupture in a partnership forged through decades of collaboration, military alliance, and economic interdependence. For Canada, the tariffs were more than a financial blow. They were a symbolic wound, suggesting that even allies were now subject to the unpredictable churn of America First nationalism. What had once been a model of cross-border harmony under NAFTA, and later the USMCA, was suddenly jeopardized by a unilateral assertion of power that left trust hanging in the balance. Economic retaliation and repercussions. The response from Canada, though measured, was resolute. Canadian officials denounced the tariffs as unjustified and insulting. Retaliatory tariffs followed, targeting quintessential American goods: orange juice, motorcycles, whiskey, and even maple syrup. At the consumer level, Canadians began opting for domestic or European alternatives, while tourism to the U.S. dropped amid rising tensions. Key industries that depend on cross-border integration, especially aerospace, auto, and logistics, began recalibrating operations. Companies accustomed to the fluidity of North American supply chains now had to navigate new barriers, both financial and psychological. The trade war did not just impose costs, it fractured a shared sense of purpose. Ford's strategic pivot and the tariff paradox: nowhere was this tension more evident than in the auto industry, particularly in the actions of Ford Motor Company. As one of the most iconic names in American manufacturing, Ford's identity is deeply intertwined with national pride. But when tariffs drove up the cost of essential raw materials, steel for chassis, aluminum for frames, and lithium for EV batteries, Ford faced a stark choice: absorb unsustainable costs or reallocate production. Ford chose the latter, announcing a partial relocation of its EV production to more cost-effective sites abroad. This move, although controversial, underscored a larger economic truth. In the face of punitive trade policies, even the most American corporations must prioritize survival over symbolism. Ironically, a policy meant to protect American industry helped catalyze its partial exodus. Far from shielding jobs, the tariffs accelerated structural shifts that drove production offshore. Instead of creating new opportunities at home, they disrupted the competitive balance, leaving workers, suppliers, and regional economies caught in the crossfire. A lesson in modern interdependence. This saga illustrates the delicate dance of 21st century economic diplomacy. In today's hyper-connected landscape, allies are not just strategic partners. They're critical links in shared supply chains. Tariffs imposed on one end of a network reverberate throughout, creating ripple effects that undermine the very stability they were meant to reinforce. The idea that economic self-sufficiency can be achieved through isolationism is at best outdated. At worst, it is self-defeating. Nations no longer operate in sealed-off silos. They co-produce, co-innovate, and co-invest. Raising walls doesn't protect these systems, it destabilizes them. The US-Canada-Mexico triangle, once a paragon of regional integration, now found itself lurching between cooperation and confrontation. The USMCA, meant to usher in a new era of harmonized trade, was tested almost before it could take root. And while the framework remains intact, the trust that sustains it has been significantly eroded. Redefining economic leadership, the broader takeaway is clear. True economic leadership isn't about punitive measures, it's about vision. It's not enough to wield power. Nations must lead with predictability, partnership, and a willingness to nurture shared prosperity. Tariffs may win short-term political points, but long-term influence is built on reliability. If the United States hopes to maintain its position as a global economic leader, it must recognize that leadership comes from collaboration, not coercion. In a time when economic resilience is defined by flexibility and cooperation, alienating allies is not a display of strength, it's a strategic misstep. Ford, Tesla, and the reinvention of American industry, patriotism, progress, and a new industrial frontier. The United States is undergoing an industrial transformation not seen since the days of the assembly line, one marked not just by technological advancement, but by a profound redefinition of what it means to be American-made in the 21st century. At the forefront of this shift stand two vastly different but equally revolutionary companies, Ford and Tesla. Their strategies reflect a critical juncture for American manufacturing, where legacy meets disruption, where tradition grapples with innovation, and where economic nationalism must coexist with global competitiveness. Ford's Project T3, reinvention from within Ford, the quintessential American automaker that once revolutionized industry with the Model T, is now betting its future on a new paradigm. With a staggering $50 billion investment in its as a T3 project, Ford is not simply updating its product line. It is re-engineering its very foundation. The initiative is centered on four key pillars. Automated manufacturing. With plans to automate up to 90% of production, Ford is redefining the scale and efficiency of vehicle assembly in a robotic age. Solid-state batteries. By investing in next-gen batteries that offer longer lifespans and faster charging, Ford is looking to eliminate one of the EV industry's greatest bottlenecks. Million-mile vehicles. The ambition to produce cars that last 1,000,000 miles marks a break from planned obsolescence and signals a new era of durability. Ultra-fast charging. Reducing charging times from hours to minutes is about more than convenience. It's about making electric vehicles truly viable for the mass market. This is more than a tech upgrade. It's a cultural shift. Ford is signaling that to stay American is to evolve. As CEO Jim Farley put it, this isn't about nostalgia, it's about relevance. Trump's pushback and the politics of progress. But not everyone is applauding this transformation. Former President Donald Trump, known for championing a muscular brand of economic nationalism, criticized Ford's pivot to electrification and automation as unpatriotic. In his view, decarbonization and robotization equate to abandoning the American worker, another casualty of globalization. Yet, Ford's rebuttal strikes at the heart of modern patriotism. To lead is to change. In an age where the future belongs to the digital and the decarbonized, clinging to the past is not a show of loyalty. It's a liability. Ford is arguing that real patriotism lies in future-proofing America's economy, not in idolizing its industrial past. Tesla's parallel revolution, disruption by design. If Ford is revolutionizing from within, Tesla is rewriting the rulebook entirely. Unlike legacy automakers bound by decades of infrastructure and tradition, Tesla emerged with no such constraints, and it turned that freedom into a superpower. Elon Musk's empire has built a vertically integrated ecosystem that challenges the traditional auto supply chain at every turn. It mines its own lithium, reducing exposure to volatile markets. It manufactures its own batteries, eliminating reliance on third parties. It produces vehicles in ultra-modern gigafactories, designed from scratch. And it sells directly to consumers, bypassing dealership networks. Tesla doesn't just make cars, it owns the process. This full-stack approach enables speed, scale, and control unmatched by traditional players. Two models, one mission. The contrast between Ford and Tesla encapsulates a larger debate about America's industrial soul. Should innovation emerge from reinvention, honoring legacy while modernizing core systems? Or should it leapfrog entirely, discarding the old playbook and starting fresh? There is no single right path, but both represent a deeper truth. The future of Made in America is no longer about assembly lines. It's about agility, ecosystem thinking, and global competitiveness. And both companies, despite their divergent philosophies, are aligned on the need to transition to clean technology, to build smarter, and to lead globally. A cultural reckoning in industry, this transformation also challenges traditional ideas about patriotism and work. What does it mean to be patriotic in an era where algorithms drive robots and cars run on electrons instead of gasoline? Can American industry embrace automation while still uplifting its workforce? Can it be both green and red, white and blue? These aren't just questions of economics, they are questions of identity. The race to relevance. In the end, the stories of Ford and Tesla are not just about cars. They are about vision, resilience, and the courage to define the next chapter of American industry. They remind us that while tradition provides roots, it's innovation that yields growth. The path ahead will be bumpy, politically charged, and technologically complex. But one thing is certain, the next industrial frontier won't be won by looking in the rearview mirror. It will be led by those who are brave enough to accelerate into the unknown. Fiscal chaos and MAGA discord, how partisan paralysis is undermining America's economic stability. The Republican Party's MAGA faction, once defined by its steadfast allegiance to Donald Trump, is now mired in a profound identity crisis, and its effects are spilling over into a national budgetary breakdown. What's unfolding is more than a political disagreement over numbers. It's a revealing portrait of ideological disarray and strategic incoherence. While the rhetoric remains fierce about reining in federal spending, the reality is embarrassingly modest. Only $4 billion in proposed cuts have materialized, a drop in the ocean compared to the $2.2 trillion federal deficit looming over the nation. This isn't a minor legislative hiccup. It's symptomatic of a larger failure in political maturity and policy vision. The MAGA movement, which once rode a wave of populist frustration to reshape the GOP's priorities, now seems paralyzed by its own contradictions. Despite championing a smaller government, its leaders cannot reach a consensus on where to apply the scalpel. Defense, entitlements, corporate subsidies. Every option fractures the base further, exposing a vacuum where coherent fiscal philosophy should be. Beyond the Capitol walls, this stalemate is eroding faith in the system. Voters don't see principled negotiation. They see chaos. They don't witness fiscal discipline. They see political posturing. The consequence? a slow bleed of public trust and rising unease in the financial markets. As uncertainty deepens, so do investor jitters, feeding concerns about delayed appropriations, stalled economic legislation, or even another government shutdown. The very idea that Congress might default on its obligations is no longer theoretical. It's a live risk being priced into America's economic future. But perhaps the most alarming consequence is what this dysfunction signals to the world: that the United States, long seen as the bedrock of financial and political stability, is now struggling with self-inflicted wounds. The implications go far beyond partisan scorekeeping. Credit agencies are watching. Global investors are recalculating. If fiscal stewardship collapses in Washington, it could send tremors through the global financial system, jeopardizing the dollar's dominance, pushing up interest rates, and raising questions about America's economic reliability. The irony is painful. The MAGA brand once promised to make America great again by rejecting elite mismanagement and restoring common-sense governance. Today, it finds itself sowing the seeds of precisely the uncertainty and dysfunction it once decried. Its internal fractures have dulled its legislative impact and created an opening for critics to question not only its competence, but its very relevance. What we're witnessing is not just a policy disagreement. It's a warning shot. A country cannot navigate a storm with a crew that argues over the compass. The deficit won't be solved by slogans. The economy won't be stabilized by performative outrage. And trust in government cannot be rebuilt without a willingness to govern. In this moment, the lesson is clear. Populism without pragmatism leads to paralysis. If lawmakers, regardless of party, fail to rise above factional infighting and confront fiscal reality with clarity and courage, the cost will be steep, not just politically, but historically. Because empires don't collapse from foreign invasions alone. Sometimes they unravel from within, one unresolved budget at a time. Green manufacturing abroad, a contradiction or a catalyst in America's sustainability strategy? John Deere's recent shift of part of its manufacturing operations to Mexico has ignited a critical conversation at the intersection of climate ambition, economic pragmatism, and global responsibility. On the surface, the optics are troubling. A flagship American brand known for its agricultural innovation now relocating production to a country where environmental regulations are more flexible. To many, this feels like a step backward, a dilution of the United States' commitment to its clean energy transition. Yet the deeper truth may be more complex and possibly more promising. While it's undeniable that Mexico's environmental oversight lacks the rigorous enforcement found in the U.S., the move by John Deere shouldn't be immediately equated with an abandonment of sustainability. Rather, it raises a more sophisticated and urgent question. Can American companies maintain high green standards even when operating in regulatory environments that don't require them? If John Deere chooses to transplant its own sustainability practices, clean tech integration, waste reduction systems, energy-efficient operations into its Mexican facilities, then it may be pioneering a transformative model of climate leadership without borders. This would mark a decisive shift in how we think about globalization, not as a race to the regulatory bottom, but as a mechanism for raising environmental standards internationally. In that light, this offshoring is not necessarily a contradiction, but a potential catalyst. Imagine a scenario in which major U.S. firms voluntarily adhere to domestic-grade environmental protocols abroad. This approach flips the narrative from greenwashing to green exporting, where, instead of exploiting weaker frameworks, corporations become agents of change, introducing cleaner processes into new markets and pushing local suppliers to meet higher expectations. Such a shift would redefine the role of American enterprise in global climate efforts. No longer confined to national borders, sustainability could evolve into a transnational ethic, one where accountability is rooted not in geography, but in corporate integrity. The implications extend far beyond one company's decision. If embraced widely, this model could help alleviate a fundamental tension in global climate policy: the unequal distribution of environmental burdens. Currently, much of the responsibility for decarbonization rests on developed nations, while emerging economies struggle with capacity. But if firms like John Deere lead the charge by investing in clean manufacturing abroad, the result could be a more equitable and effective global transition, Moreover, this vision positions the private sector as a partner, not just a participant, in international climate diplomacy. Instead of relying solely on treaties and top-down enforcement, sustainability could flow bottom-up through commerce, innovation, and example. American companies, in this sense, would become informal ambassadors of environmental values, projecting green influence through every supply chain decision. Of course, such a future hinges on transparency and accountability. Without third-party audits and enforceable internal policies, the risk of symbolic gestures replacing substantive change is real. But with the right guardrails, John Deere's relocation could serve as a proof of concept, a bold experiment in turning offshoring into an opportunity for planetary stewardship. This is no longer just a matter of where factories are built. It's a litmus test for whether U.S. environmental ideals can travel beyond its borders and reshape global manufacturing norms. In an era where climate action is the new currency of credibility, the companies that rise to this challenge won't just be adapting to the future, they'll be defining it. North America's post-globalization industrial ecosystem, the rise of NAFTA 2.0. The recent manufacturing shifts by U.S. giants like John Deere and Ford into Mexico aren't just cost-cutting maneuvers. They're early indicators of a structural transformation reshaping the economic map of North America. Under the quietly influential umbrella of the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, we are witnessing the formation of a new, more resilient industrial network, one that some are now calling NAFTA 2.0. But this isn't merely a trade policy rebrand. It represents a re-engineering of how North American economies relate to one another in a world no longer dominated by the logic of globalism. With the geopolitical climate growing more turbulent, amid trade friction with China, supply chain fragility, and rising security concerns, corporations are increasingly turning toward nearshoring. The strategy is simple in concept, but profound in impact. Shorten the distance between production and consumption, tighten supply loops, and rely on regional allies rather than far-flung global partners. What's emerging is a tripartite economic ecosystem. Mexico, with its competitive labor costs and expanding industrial infrastructure, is evolving into a powerhouse of assembly and manufacturing. The United States serves as the brain and financial engine, home to R&D, high-value design, and capital investment. Canada, meanwhile, is carving out a role in precision manufacturing, green technologies, and engineering-heavy sectors. This division of labor isn't just efficient, it's strategic. Regionalizing supply chains offers a defense against external disruptions that once seemed distant but now feel routine. Semiconductor shortages, port congestions, geopolitical flare-ups, or sudden tariffs. By concentrating industrial processes within the North American bloc, companies are building a kind of economic firewall, one grounded not only in logistics but in shared political values and regulatory compatibility. Yet there's an even larger idea at play here, a chance to reclaim industrial policy as a source of regional renewal, not just profit margin optimization. NAFTA 2.0, if leveraged wisely, could spark a renaissance in domestic production, not by retreating into isolationism, but by redesigning globalization into a more controlled, cooperative, and sustainable form. Rather than chasing the cheapest labor across continents, firms can invest in trusted partners close to home. Rather than relying on just-in-time systems stretched across oceans, they can build just-in-case buffers that are agile and adaptable. This shift also creates the groundwork for a continental economic identity, one that blends U.S. innovation, Mexican manufacturing capacity, and Canadian engineering into a unified competitive force. Done right, it could offer a compelling alternative to the old model of globalization, which often prioritized cost over resilience and scale over sovereignty. Of course, this vision is not guaranteed. It requires intentional alignment across borders, harmonized regulations, modernized transport infrastructure, and mutual investment in workforce development. If the US, Mexico, and Canada fail to coordinate, the promise of this new model may falter under the weight of uneven implementation or political discord. But if they succeed, the rewards could be transformative. In a world growing skeptical of unfettered globalization, regionalization isn't just a fallback. It's a forward-looking strategy. It's about anchoring prosperity in proximity, insulating supply chains from chaos and proving that a more interconnected continent can be a stronger one. Ultimately, this is more than a post-NAFTA adjustment. It's a blueprint for how regions, not just nations, can thrive in the fractured, unpredictable economy of the 21st century. I believe that in an increasingly connected and competitive world, it is inevitable for American companies like John Deere and Ford to adjust their production strategies to remain competitive. However, it is crucial to ensure that this transition does not erode their core values and social responsibilities. The government must also implement supportive policies, not just relying on protectionist tools like tariffs, but investing in infrastructure, education, and innovation to build a foundation for sustainable economic growth. Only through strong public-private collaboration can the United States maintain and strengthen its global leadership in this new industrial age. Thank you for watching until the end of the video. If you found this content helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support us in continuing to deliver more balanced and realistic analysis. Feel free to leave a comment below. We always value every perspective shared in a constructive spirit. See you in the next video.